Now, Lex Paulson, thank you very much for joining us on Live on Live.
My pleasure.
This afternoon. I'll introduce you as a lecturer in rhetoric and political thought at the Institute of Political Studies here in France, SciencePo. But you're also a former advisor to the Obama campaign in 2008 and also to the Macron campaign this year, and the En Marche, as it was called now, it's called République En Marche, the new party of the President of France. Now, this week, French senators are discussing the bill on the moralization, as it's called, of politics, whilst the lower house is grappling with the first reading of the bill that would enable the government, if it's voted through, which it probably will be, to amend the existing labour laws by decree. Less than a month after President Emmanuel Macron's party handsomely won the majority in the National Assembly, a week after the president himself set out his vision for the country in a sort of State of the Nation speech before both houses at Versailles. I'm just giving some background here. Followed by the presentation of the government's political agenda on 4th of July, there is a feel that things are moving in earnest. Now, this is despite the fact that there's probably fatigue following a very long campaign. There were
I feel it too.
For both, for the left and the right, then followed by the 2 rounds in France of presidential elections, and then 2 rounds of parliamentary elections. And now, of course, it's holiday time in France. Now,
for some,
yes, but I think for most people have got their minds set on
Indeed.
Going away from it all sometimes.
Indeed.
But Macron had actually vowed himself some time ago that MPs would be cracking on throughout the summer, rather than enjoy what some probably would have expected to be a well-deserved rest. In your opinion, how much of an impact such activity, such activism, is likely to have on public opinion in France?
Well, I think in France as well as in the US, the time that you want to do your most difficult reforms is right away. And Emmanuel Macron didn't have a choice as to when during the year the presidential and legislative elections were going to be. They were going to be in the late spring, early summer. And in order to get this very difficult reform around the Code du Travail underway, he had to put it in place as soon as possible. And so I think you're seeing a process that's probably a bit more accelerated based on the calendar than it might have been otherwise. But I think that this is also a policy that has been worked out over the last many months. And so it's much different than what you're seeing, for example, with the healthcare bill, which is being cobbled together with string and duct tape in Washington, D.C. The loi de travail, the loi de moralisation, the basic lines of those reforms have been known now for some time. And so I think that the public is waiting for Macron to do what he has talked about in some detail during the campaigns.
Now, we'll touch on the first paradox, is the fact the bill is being discussed, this first reading, not so much to change the legislation, but in fact to enable the government to change things by decree. Now, Macron was actually elected on a wave of enthusiasm for those who actually turned up, because the turnout was actually not very high. And yet they want to rule by decree. He has a large majority. People could discuss things. They have time to do it. There are time constraints anyway, that can be said. So why, in your opinion, do you think that he has decided to do it this way?
No, I take the point that there's an apparent tension between the need to push substantive reforms, like this very difficult structural change to the labor market in France, on the one hand, and on the other hand, to say that we're changing the way we're doing business and making it more participatory, more horizontal, more decentralized. I think that that's only really a tension on the surface, however, and I'll tell you why. Because on the one hand, as we said before, there is quite a lot of debate that's already taken place on the substance of the Code du Travail. The president has defended it at some length during the campaign. The public is not going to be surprised at what's in this reform. And frankly, all of the députés who ran on the ticket for En Marche know what the substance of the reform deals with. And so I think that the practical answer is, in the short term, that Macron has created this this process to pass the decree by ordonnance, because the most difficult part of getting this reform accepted by the public will be the negotiations set to happen in August with the unions and with the different parties prenantes, stakeholders in the private sector. And it's only if this reform is going to happen by the fall, it's those negotiations that need to be complete and in hand by the time the ordonnance goes through in September. So I think what you're going to see, this is the first step of a many-stage process, that the law will be acté, but that there will be returns and revisions and evaluations of that law in the coming years. And in that process, the député will be very involved.
There are other matters that reforms, proposed reforms. One is, of course, change the way things are done, cutting the number of MPs, for instance, establishing greater transparency in the way decisions are taken or bills are voted through. Do you think it's, in comparison with what exists in France, that has existed for a long time, do you think there is likely to happen, because there's always a lot of rhetoric there have been for presidents with a new dawn, announcing a new dawn, and then very quickly things actually took a turn for the worse. Do you think this time it will stick?
I think we're seeing a new kind of dynamic in the Assemblée nationale that has not existed in the Fifth Republic so far, and may never exist again after this quinquennat. And that is, the French public is used to seeing these great debates happening between a strong, cohesive left and a strong, cohesive right. And when the right has power, it's the left that opposes it. And then when the left has power, vice versa. And what you're seeing now is a series of centrist, pragmatic reforms that are drawing in ideas from the left and ideas from the right, and the opposition is relatively small and relatively splintered. And so I think that the process that these laws are going to follow is going to look a little bit different. Instead of having these zero-sum battles from ideology on the left and right, it's going to be, how do we take these substantive ideas and keep evaluating them, iterating them, improving them over the course of the 5-year period, instead of just saying, we win, we're going to go home. I think that it's going to be a first stage in a bit of a longer process.
Now, of course, there is always the possibility that we'll see action on the streets after the non-event in Parliament, as some will see it. Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the leader of the left France Insoumise, Unsubmissive or Unbowed France, has actually already vowed this will happen. Now, compared with the States, what do you think? It's a good thing that things are not discussed through properly, perhaps in parliaments, and then in France there will be strike action soon afterwards, and then obviously people will have to start to talk, or the legislation will be withdrawn, as has happened in the past.
Well, I think I take a little bit of a wider view. I mean, the debates over the content of this law began during the campaign. The public was exposed to many different points of view, including Jean-Luc Mélenchon's point of view, which was voiced very eloquently and bombastically, as he has a tendency to do. And frankly, I think that the French people expect that Macron will follow through with what he promised. Of course, there will be a backlash. There always is. There will be the reflexive reaction of some on the left to say that anything that could possibly be good for business must be terrible for workers, and so we have to come out en masse. But I think we have an opportunity on En Marche, because we have 375,000 members of our party, to be on the ground equally in force to explain why this is in the benefit of the French economy, why this is in the benefit of young people who are looking for work, why this is in the benefit of independent workers, why this is in the benefit of small and medium-sized businesses. And so if we can make that case, then we welcome that debate. We welcome the Insoumis to be out in force, but we think this is a debate we can win.
Now, going back to your advising the Obama campaign in 2008, and then this time round, the Macron campaign. What differences do you see between the two, and what convergences do you see between the two?
To start with the convergences, I mean, both in Barack Obama and Emmanuel Macron, you had a figure with rare personal qualities to inspire people who didn't normally do politics to get out and knock on doors and organize. And so I think you had an opportunity based on the exceptional men at the heart of these campaigns. The difference is, number one, you have a huge campaign finance difference where in France, Emmanuel Macron spent around 16 million euros, and in the US, it was about $1 billion. So the role of money is, it plays very differently in the US. But I will say in France, you're seeing more and more of these on-the-ground mobilization tactics that help Barack Obama win and that we have started putting in practice here in France. I think it's a promising course for progressive politics.
Lex Paulson, thank you very much. That's all we have time for. Unfortunately, I'm sure there was lots more to say. But thank you very much for joining us today on Live on Live.
It's been a pleasure.